wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life. This is the Sunday Stoic.
A quick thank you to Ron, Preston, Patrick, Nicole, Nick, Michael, Matthew, Lucas, Lisa, Eric, David, Christopher, and Carlos for supporting the Sunday Stoic on Patreon. Today we'll look at the Stoic view of exile. Back in the day, you could be ostracized from your community, sent away to live on an island somewhere or in another land if you had made the emperor mad or caused some trouble in your community. And this is basically the punishment you would get if you weren't quite worthy of being put to death, I guess. Or maybe you're too important to be put to death. It would make the emperor look bad, so he just sends you off to disappear for a while. And if you're lucky, you get called back out of exile. You return to your life. And this was apparently quite the punishment for some people. People who were used to a life with a certain level of comfort, with a certain level of influence. To be sent away seemed like a very awful punishment. But we can see that several Stoic philosophers experienced this process. Seneca was banished for several years to Corsica. Epictetus was sent away and ended up teaching in Greece. And I believe Musonius Rufus was also exiled for a while. But the Stoics remind us that while it might seem tragic to be sent away, in all reality, it's not an evil to be exiled because you carry all of your goods with you. The fragments of Musonius Rufus number 9 that exile is not an evil. Hearing an exile lament because he was living in banishment, Musonius consoled him in somewhat the following way. Why, he asked, should anyone who is not devoid of understanding be oppressed by exile? It does not in any way deprive us of water, earth, air, or the sun and the other planets, or indeed even the society of men. For everywhere and in every way there is opportunity for association with them. What if we are kept from a certain part of the earth, and from association with certain men? What is so dreadful about that? Why, when we were at home, we did not enjoy the whole earth, nor did we have contact with all men. But even now in exile we may associate with our friends. That is to say, the true ones and those deserving of the name, for they would never betray or abandon us. But if some prove to be sham and not true friends, we are better off separated from them than being with them. Tell me, is not the universe the common fatherland of all men, as Socrates held? Well then, you must not consider it really being banished from your fatherland if you go from where you were born and reared, but only being exiled from a certain city. That is, if you claim to be a reasonable person. For such a man does not value or despise any place as the cause of his happiness or unhappiness, but he makes the whole matter depend upon himself, and considers himself a citizen of the city of God, which is made up of men and gods. Moral Letters to Lucilius by Seneca, number 24, on Despising Death. If you lose this case, can anything more severe happen to you than being sent into exile or led to prison? Is there a worse fate that any man may fear than being burned or being killed? Name such penalties one by one, and mention the men who have scorned them. One does not need to hunt for them. It is simply a matter of selection. Sentence of conviction was borne by Rutilius as if the injustice of the decision were the only thing which annoyed him. Exile was endured by Metilius with courage, by Rutilius even with gladness, for the former consented to come back only because his country called him. The latter refused to return when Sulla summoned him, and nobody in those days said no to Sulla. Socrates in prison discoursed, and declined to flee when certain persons gave him the opportunity. He remained there, in order to free mankind from the fear of the two most grievous things, death and imprisonment. Mucius put his hand into the fire, It is painful to be burned, but how much more painful to inflict such suffering upon oneself. Here was a man of no learning, not primed to face death and pain by any words of wisdom, and equipped only with the courage of a soldier, who punished himself for his fruitless daring. He stood and watched his own right hand falling away piecemeal on the enemy's brazier. Nor did he withdraw the dissolving limb with its uncovered bones until his foe removed the fire. He might have accomplished something more successful in that camp, but never anything more brave. See how much keener a brave man is to lay hold of danger than a cruel man is to inflict it.
The Discourses of Epictetus, Book 2, number 19.
Show me someone untroubled with disturbing thoughts about illness, danger, death, exile, or loss of reputation. By all the gods, I want to see a Stoic.
The Discourses of Epictetus, Book 4, number 7.
Exile? Wherever I go, it will be well with me. For even here it was not the place that made me well off, but my judgments, and these I shall carry away with me, for no one can rob me of them.
Musonius is pretty adamant that we don't have a good understanding of reality if we think being ostracized is a bad thing. No matter where they send us, we still have the earth, and we still have the fellowship of our true friends. In fact, you can think of exile as a filter, allowing you to easily perceive your true friends from your false friends. The true friends will stick with you, will write to you, will visit you, while the false friends will fade away. He also says that even when we were at home, it's not like we had the whole earth to roam around on. So what's the difference now being on an island or being in a different country? We still have a piece of the earth to enjoy. It's no different, really, if you think about it that way. And if we are good Stoics, we remember that we are at home everywhere. We're part of the cosmopolis. Anywhere on earth is our home. And location is ultimately not the source of our happiness or our unhappiness. That is up to us. Epictetus reiterates that, where he says that it's his judgments that make him well off, not his location. Seneca kind of goes on a tangent here, but he's talking to Lucilius, who's worried about the outcome of a trial. Lucilius is worried about what punishments he may face. And Seneca says, listen, you might be exiled. In an extreme case, you might be killed. And you could be killed in a number of ways. But for every bad punishment you can imagine, you can find a hero who bore that punishment well. And he brings up some examples of individuals sent into exile, some of them happily, some of them even refusing to come back when the emperor changed their mind. He also talks about Socrates, who could have fled from prison. He could have been whisked away and ran off from Athens and survived, but Socrates refused. And he speaks of Socrates almost like a Christian speaking of Jesus here, where he says Socrates freed us from fear of death and imprisonment. By sticking around and facing imprisonment and facing death, he showed us that they are not evils and they can be faced down by a wise person. He also brings up Mucius Scaevola, the Roman kid who was captured in an enemy camp and then burned his own hand in the sacrificial fire to prove that he was brave, and just brings up once again the fact that you could suffer any one of these so-called horrible punishments. But look, in all these circumstances, we have seen people who have faced various kinds of torture or exile or death, and they face them bravely. And so we too can face them bravely. And I like Epictetus's rant towards the end there, where he said he's mad at his students because they're mostly interested in showing off their knowledge rather than actually living it. And he says, show me somebody who's not put off by death or exile. I want to see a Stoic. He's lamenting that he hasn't actually seen a real Stoic, just kind of hangers-on or pretenders. And we're trying to live up to that, trying to be that Stoic, right? But I doubt if any of us can actually claim the title. I myself catch myself, and these readings help me to see some of my own hypocrisy, which is a good thing, I guess, to catch it. Living that examined life. I've often thought in the back of my mind, well, exile wouldn't be so bad. Like if the President of the United States told me that I had to go live in Nevada or something, I don't know. I mean, I don't know where exile would be. We don't really do that anymore, right? We do imprison people, though, which is kind of like a form of exile. And I thought that wouldn't be so bad to be exiled. But then I realized that I am living in a form of exile, and I complain about it all the time because I'm a hypocrite. I live in Arkansas. I'm not from Arkansas. I didn't move here because I wanted to live in Arkansas. I moved here for a job. And I left my family, my parents and my grandmother and my brother and aunts and uncles and the family farm and all of that back in Ohio. And I have often griped about that. It's a different climate. It's a slightly different culture. And I miss where I grew up. I miss winter in the winter. But I realized this is basically a form of self-imposed exile. You can think of it that way. And if I gripe about this, I surely would gripe about real exile. I have to remember that it's about being the best person I can be. It's about having character and finding good where I live, making the best of it. It's about my judgments. It's about that happiness that's up to me. It's not about my location. I mean, where I live isn't awful by any means. It's just not what I grew up being used to. And if you read that full reading by Musonius, he says, wouldn't we think somebody crazy if they were upset because they still lived in the city where they were born, but they had to live in a different house down the street? And they were like, oh, I have to live down the street from where I grew up, from where I was born. We'd say, oh, big deal. Get over it. Well, the same applies to us and living anywhere on the earth. Anywhere is fine. We still have the sun, the moon, the stars. We'll be okay. It's up to us to be happy. So, we should also then remember that Musonius puts a high status on friendship. Friendship is more important than where you live, if you really read into that, right? Having those true friends makes location unimportant. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind when it comes to justice. How many people do you know that are in some kind of exile, some form of exile? Maybe a former neighbor or an aunt or uncle in the nursing home. Maybe someone in the hospital. Maybe a neighbor who has no visitors and no family. But you could potentially reach out to them and be that friend, that true friend that just checks in on them and says hello. Are we living up to that part of our responsibilities as a Stoic, as a member of the Cosmopolis? Don't forget to sign up for Stoic Week. It's coming up soon. And patrons, I'll have a little bit of a conversation with you after the end of the show. And for everyone else, have a great week. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and Carpe Diem.
Thank you for listening to The Sunday Stoic. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review The Sunday Stoic on iTunes. Become a member of the Sunday Stoic team, earn rewards, and be an integral part of the show by becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. Contact the show by emailing sundaystoic@gmail.com or by leaving a voicemail at 501-503-3132. To find out more, visit www.sundaystoicpodcast.com. And as Steve always says, Carpe Diem.
Hey, patrons. Hope your week's going well. I had my day made, my day made this week by a preferred indifferent, one of those ego boosters. If you remember on some earlier episodes, I